All right, this thing on? Folks at home?
Can folks online hear? Okay.
All right, cool. I think I'm ready to go here. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Brian Quinlan. All that fancy jargon earlier means I'm an elementary school teacher by day, but a birder all the time. And today's talk that we're going to have here is about the Cassatt Preserve at the headwaters of birding at the Upper Main Line YMCA, which is also fancy jargon for that the headwaters of Darby Creek start right up the road from this place, a location that has a lot of really interesting local history, but also has a lot of really interesting natural history. And over the last 100 years that this preserve has changed and has been altered and served many different purposes, one of the things that has not changed is that it's been a very high quality habitat for birds and for nature. And not only has it been a really great quality habitat for birds, but it's been a place that's done so much for a lot of people that want to get into nature and learn about birds and birding as well. So tonight's kind of going to be a bit of a journey looking at some of the history of the Cassatt Preserve at the Upper Main Line YMCA, but also talking about some of the habitats and some of the special things that have come out of the combination of these things all coexisting here. So tonight's presentation is going to be a combination of photography taken by yours truly of the birds, but I also was provided some great archival photography as well from Father Antry of the Dalesford Abbey. So it's going to be pretty interesting to get to take a trip through time. So what do you say we take a trip and see what the YMCA is all about here? Wait a second. There we go. Cool. So when you think of a YMCA, you probably think a building like this, you know, a place where people go to work out and play tennis or pickleball now, whatever you prefer, I suppose, whatever, basically a place to stay active and bring your family to summer camp. But when I picture a YMCA, or I picture the Upper Main Line YMCA in Berwyn, Pennsylvania, this is really what I picture in my mind here. This is a photograph dating back to 2003, which was a couple of years after I really started to begin my birding journey as a young boy. And looking back at the building now, it's amazing to see how much it's changed and the purpose that it serves. But to go even further back in time to a much different time here, this is a picture of the same building back in the 1950s, and the building actually has a name. That's how you know you're rich, when your building has a name here. So this is the building called Kelso. It was the summer estate of Joseph Gardner Cassatt, who's the brother of the 7th Pennsylvania Railroad president Alexander Cassatt, and also the brother of the American Impressionist painter Mary Cassatt. There is a lot of folklore from folks, especially folks who've been at the Y a long time, that Mary Cassatt has visited this building, which there's been no direct evidence to say that she actually has, although she has visited Philadelphia at the time that Joseph Gardner was living here. To go further back into time to look at Joseph Gardner himself, he was a businessman. He had an investment business in Philadelphia. They're called Cassatt and Company. If you could see, this is him on the left when he was younger, him on the right, quite a bit older, on one of his many horses that he had owned. And the Kelso mansion was started to be built around 1906 or 1907. And it was finally completed in 1911. It was finished, and then Cassatt passed away in 1911. So the building really wasn't enjoyed by him very much, unfortunately, but his descendants had lived in this mansion here until about 1950, which is when it was sold to Our Lady of Dalesford Norbertine Fathers. So a lot of the archival photos I have tonight here are from this organization, and it's pretty funny to go through and see some of the places where I grew up birding as a young man in such a different light, seeing the fathers here being trained to go into Catholic priesthood. They lived in this mansion and on this property for about a decade before moving to the present day Dalesford Abbey, with its location in Paoli. So the Upper Main Line YMCA actually started in 1962, originally out of the Tredyffrin Easttown Junior High School down the street. And then in 1964, moved into the mansion that you see here today. At the time, they had leased some of the rooms in the mansion out to other entities. And oddly enough, Valley Forge Audubon Society's headquarters was housed in this mansion when they had first set up shop in this as well. So pretty amazing that the birding connection has lived there for that long. And as we transition back into modern times here. The mansion and surrounding campus have seen enormous change since this time period here. So let's say we go up to the skies here. The land of the Cassatt Preserve was originally purchased in 1906, and it was 124 acres. Fast forward to modern times, the campus has now been whittled down to 54 acres, 20 of which are the outdoor classroom. So tonight, what I'm hoping to do is we're going to go on a little virtual tour here of the Cassatt Preserve, starting here at the very top of the woods, and working our way all the way down past our beloved pond, through our meadow, and back around. So I mentioned before about the headwaters and what that means here for us. It's situated right at the headwaters of Darby Creek, that little star there. I'm a teacher, so I love a good gold star. So you can see this is where one of the three headwaters of Darby Creek is located, and it flows all the way down right past our amazing John Hines. As a kid, I was so fascinated by how the place I grew up birding and then my favorite field trip location were on the same, waterway. I always thought that was super cool. And, Darby Creek, especially in the area along the YMCA, it's real small. It's not like when you go further down to Hines and you have the tidal impact of how big that creek is there. It's made the area very interesting. And oddly enough, one of the things that's really remarkable about the Cassatt Preserve is that it was the first conservation easement in the state of Pennsylvania, set by Natural Lands in 1966. So thanks to their preservation of this land, this patch of woodland has been able to be enjoyed by many generations and will be enjoyed by many generations for future years. So bravo to our friends at Natural Lands. As far as modern birding goes, jumping into the eBird stats here, we've seen a grand total of 137 different species here over the years that we've had an eBird account. It's actually up to like around 440 something checklists at this point here. But as I take you through the trip around these habitats tonight, we've identified 24 different species of warbler on this campus, 11 different species of sparrow, and 10 species of wild birds of prey. So I'll leave it at that when it comes to the wild elements of the birds of prey. So primarily the forested area of the Cassatt Preserve is composed of deciduous trees like tulip poplar, American beech, black walnut mixed with some other coniferous trees as well. We have some stray patches of eastern hemlock and white pine, great for things like blue-headed vireos and other birds like that pass through. This is what the forest looks like in the wintertime. And as things blossom out, it really is a nice lush forest that you get to enjoy and get to go birding in. And the entrance driveway of the Cassatt family actually runs along this path here. And if you were to follow this driveway here and you ended up where the driveway ends, oops, wrong way, where the driveway ends here, you can see some of these Norbertine fathers enjoying a stroll on these roads here. And oddly enough, although these are pretty cool people that have visited our campus here, the most notable visitor to our campus actually was many years ago, Richard Nixon. His daughter lives near here and used to spend time walking the woods here with Secret Service after he was president. So some of the folks who had worked at the Y a long time used to tell stories of being summer camp counselors and then being told by Secret Service to get out of the woods because the former pres wanted to take a stroll. So pretty amazing that we get cool visitors like that many moons ago. But now we get cool visitors like red-tailed hawks that breed right on the campus. We had a red-tailed hawk nest for a couple of years. We've even had a broadwing hawk nest here on the campus many years ago as well. Scarlet tanager, one of our canopy dwellers, very vocal. Other birds like red-eyed vireo that you can find in the forested section of the Cassatt Preserve in the springtime and sometimes even throughout the summer. And of course, because we're in the forest, you get all the woodpeckers as well. Birds like downy woodpecker, northern flicker. If you're lucky in the wintertime and you spend a lot of time in those woods, you can even pull out a yellow-bellied sapsucker from a distance. I love these woods because there's a lot of cool trails, a lot of unique little patches of habitat. But even though we love our white-tailed deer, unfortunately, they have browsed the understory in a pretty significant way. But even though there aren't a lot of understory patches in parts of these woods, you still get some good understory dwellers in the winter, like white-throated sparrow. You also can get winter wren, but of course, in the spring and summer, we get our friend, the house wren, and the Carolina wren. Wish I had a hat, throw a hat trick in there for that, for the three wrens. One of the things I love doing, especially when I'm leading a bird walk with students through there, is I love to try to whistle in a tufted titmouse, give them a little, I got to be even a little higher than that. There we go. You whistle in the tufted titmouse. Hopefully you bring in Carolina chickadee. And then if you're lucky in the spring and the fall, you can even bring in some warblers as well. Birds like northern parula that we were just reporting on earlier, passing through our area right now. Black and white warbler, which no need to adjust your set. That's just how it was when I took that photo. These birds are just so amazing at crawling up and down. We got male dude American redstarts. We got female American redstarts. And as you walk through these woods and you start to hit some of these smaller habitats, there's a couple of landmarks, especially if you go through the eBird notes. You'll find that there are places they talk about that are landmarks for birders, but also landmarks for students here as well. So we have a couple of creek crossings that we have here. And some of these were projects that were done by the Y just for safety purposes. Others were Eagle Scout projects. This one was a project done for safety purposes. As you can see, this old farm bridge that the Cassatt family used to use to get to their barn has been in a state of disrepair for a long time. But what they did was they took this, actually an old modular classroom, they took it off the modular and they used the frame and they laid the frame down and then built a bridge over it. And now that serves as what we call the broken bridge. A lot of kids, you know, when we have summer camps, they all want to go to the broken bridge because you have easy creek access down here. So not only is it good for the kids, the birds love to come down here to the broken bridge as well. Another hot spot within our forest we call the Eye of the Storm, which is kind of a wacky name, but it refers to a low-lying area that was at once completely covered in invasives. When I was a little kid, we used to go to the section here of the Eye of the Storm, and it used to be invasive so thick with multiflora rose and honeysuckle that you used to be able to climb on top of it and go for a walk. It was quite disgusting. So this is a picture from January 2013 of this location. And in 2020, the area really has grown up a whole lot since then from the same perspective. You can see that we've removed a lot of invasives. We've been letting a lot of the natives starting to grow in this area. But as things get more lush, unfortunately, our mile a minute and other invasives come back, but it still produces a great habitat. And it turns out the reason why this area here is so marshy is because there's actually an old pool from the Cassatt family that's in that location. And the frame is still there. And as a result, it holds in a ton of water. So we call it the Eye of the Storm too, because in the middle of this giant marshy area when we were kids and there were invasives everywhere, you used to be able to crawl under and you'd find like this really swampy wetland that was being choked out by the invasive plants. So basically this whole section here is like this little micro marsh within the YMCA, but it's also a piece of great folklore for the Y as well, because believe it or not, not one, but two people have died in this pool, one in 1932 and one in 1958. So there's a lot of ghost stories that surround this here. Very tragic, very sad stuff that happened here. But because of this interesting pool that's still hanging here underground, this was an area that as students, we decided that we were going to remove these invasives and replace them with good native plants. So this is from it's from 2007 here on the left, from 2013 here on the right, as we're trying to fight back. I mean, in this 2007 picture down below here with the girl holding the flippers, so you can really see just how thick all that stuff is, just multiflora rose and blackberry and other stuff that is, you know, some of it is beneficial to birds, but we knew that this was a great habitat project for the students over the years to fix this place up here. And, you know, looking at this area here in 2013 and looking at this crew here, you can see that in 2020, all these years later, this area has really grown up. The willow trees here taken off. We've put a little boardwalk through the marsh so people can bird in the marsh. And long after that, you can even see that this has grown up even more lush. You can barely see into it. But because this area is this great little wetland, it's a little micro magnet for birds. So you can hang out here on this platform and look right down into the marsh, and you get your common birds again, like your northern cardinal. You get your tufted titmouse that you give a little whistle to, and if you whistle it in just right, you'll be rewarded with great birds and migrants like Tennessee warbler, which I took right in the eye of the storm. Canada warbler, another bird taken right in this same spot along that boardwalk there. And if you pitch hard enough, you might even break out a brown thrasher from the mix here. We even get, you know, our very cool gray catbird, which people probably say, oh, cool, gray catbirds. They're, if you don't have a pulse, you know, that's how you miss them. But in the winter time, we even get holdover catbirds that enjoy this spot as well. from our Christmas bird count. So pretty exciting spot that this eye of the storm rewards us with cool migrants, cool wintering birds. You even get Baltimore Orioles nesting in our hybrid sycamore London plane trees that hang just above the eye of the storm here as well. So it's pretty cool to get to see these breeding birds and to even get some of these descendants spending a little bit of time in the eye of the storm as well. We even one time had in June 2017, a black and white warbler that was hanging around during the Valley Forge spring count, which unfortunately, not long after this, we weren't able to see it again. But I always wondered if this bird was a breeder or not, just because it was, you know, the first weekend of June. These birds are typically where they're supposed to be by then. But pretty cool to get to see a black and white warbler hanging around a little late. As we continue our journey through the Cassatt Preserve, we head south, catch one of our boardwalks here on the Hemlock Trail, which again, this is another piece that runs along the old Cassatt driveway and takes you to our beloved pond, a place that as a young man, I love to go and with a net and try to catch tadpoles and frogs and things like that. But for the birds, it's a really valuable and very unique habitat for them to enjoy. The pond's gone through a lot of changes. You can say that again. When the pond was first constructed, it really was like a decorative thing. You had dogwood trees lining it. You had these domestic fowl that would hang out here and walk around, almost like something out of like a movie with these with the monks walking around with their duck friends. But now walking that same path, you can see this habitat's really changed in this time period here. It's turned into a real habitat. It's not just like something you look at and it looks pretty like a statue. It's a real habitat with a lot of cool birds. And the pond, which at one point looked so sterile with this little rock dam and its mowed to the edge style, has now really blossomed into this great habitat for birds and has brought in a lot of cool birds over the years. Things like mallards. We've had a total of 7 species of waterfowl, 5 of which are ducks. Not a lot of ducks, just because there's a lot of foot traffic from people that live nearby, and the water isn't very deep here as well. There's about 2 feet of depth because of all the erosion, which originally this thing was about 15 feet deep. So that's unfortunately a shame. If you're lucky, you can see a wood duck peeking out of the corner of the pond, but they won't stay long. This is probably the worst photo I've ever taken of an American black duck, but it's the only American black duck photo we have from the Y. So I take great pride in my awful photo. It totally stinks. We've had nesting green heron at this pond here as well. When I was a kid, I used to think there was a Virginia rail for the longest time. And then one day I saw it lift a green thing off of its head and I was like, seems kind of odd. So we've learned through this bird that, yeah, Virginia rails don't hang out in the open like that. And they don't have green on their head either. So lessons learned, I guess. The pond looking nice here in its usual splendor. However, a couple years ago, we had a tree fall and it actually cracked the drainage pipe and we had a mud flat for a little while, which as a birdie, you think, oh man, this is great. Unfortunately, it didn't produce a ton of birds, but it did produce 1 solitary sandpiper. Again, this is another horrible photo, but just walking by, I was like, oh man, cool. Solitary sandpiper, snap, take it. So that's a cool new bird for the property just because of this fallen tree. That's since been repaired and it's better. But during this time of the fallen tree, we also had probably my most excited bird of the campus, my favorite bird I've ever seen here, juvenile little blue heron hanging out here. But bad news for the little blue heron, the pond has been fixed, unfortunately. I haven't seen a little blue heron there since, but we have a new, very fancy, although very ugly drainage pipe. And now the pond is looking a lot better. So now that it's looking a lot less sterile, we have our Canada geese back and the pond is anew. And actually I was back at the Y a couple of weeks ago and it was cool. The water level's high enough, people are able to canoe again for the longest time after that pipe crack. And the water filled back in. It was kind of not a lot of water. It was kind of sad. Now water level's high enough. Pretty cool to see people enjoying the pond the way we want it to. Up next, here's the meadow. This is a location that was built from scratch when it comes to habitat here at the Y. Previous to this time, our meadow used to look a lot like this. This is an old-timey photo here. And you can see that it was just kind of wide open grasses that were manicured to be wide open and say, hey, look at all the grass we can afford to mow. In 2012, we took it upon ourselves at the Y. We said, you know what? Let's make a habitat out of this here. So we decided to buy 500 native plant plugs and get them in the ground, get some students to work to plant some of these plants here. And in 2019, from the same perspective, we now have a very different looking meadow here that now is a great place to see some birds and to provide new habitat to birds that wasn't available previously. So we had gotten the volunteer group in 2012 and 2013 to get, I believe it was 500 plants each year in the ground in the section, which was a huge undertaking, and ended up getting birds like tree swallow nesting right here in the campus. We get common yellowthroats that breed in our meadow now. Song sparrows, we get them quite a bit. And what's interesting too is next to our meadow, we have a lot of sports fields. And because we have our meadow, we have our nest boxes, we have the nice mowed grass next to it, we get bluebirds. They love the greater meadow region, but they also especially love visiting one of our gardens and posting up on some of the posts. And they even will be resourceful and use the human elements here, seeing the bluebirds picking whatever out of the tarps of the tennis courts, which is pretty funny to see here. As you walk past through our meadow and you end up past the tennis courts, we have a gravel track. We get dark-eyed juncos over there. You get the bluebirds enjoying the cinder as well. If you look up, you get our birds of prey like red-tailed hawk. And if you're in the wintertime, you get cool flyovers like snow geese. I love posting up there at the track because it's a big wide open sky view. You get a lot of great views of the snow geese passing by. In spring and summer, we have chimney swifts because they nest in the abundant chimneys that we have here at the Y. The highest count was 26 in August of 2017, but I'd be curious if we did a survey how many more chimney swifts we have these days in the chimneys of the Y. So now that we've made it back to the YMCA building after doing our loop around the campus here, in the area that is next to the actual mansion, there were a bunch of other buildings that were built by the Cassatt family as well. There was a building called the Carriage House. It's still called the Carriage House. There are no horses, but horses used to live there. Next to that is the modern day environmental education complex. This is a photo of it here in 2020. That looks really nice and manicured and looks beautiful here, but building has seen a lot of tough times here. This is a picture taken by Jane L. Davidson in 1986 for the Pennsylvania Resource Survey. This building sat empty after it was used as a locker room and shower room for a while, and it was left as that for a long time. Prior to this, it was a garage for the Dalesford Abbey. You can see, I don't know, anyone know what kind of car this is? A lot of answers there. Yeah. But it's pretty crazy to see this cool old picture with Our Lady of Dalesford on the side here, working in front of this building here. And after sitting vacant as storage for so many years, the shell of a building is now heavily used as the Environmental Education Center. On the inside of it, we have a whole setup of animal tanks and animal displays for people and students to enjoy. But right around the building, we have a whole ton of bird feeders as well. We have American goldfinches there. In the wintertime, we get pine siskin. We get more of our dark-eyed juncos, and we even have a bunch of good native flowers around here to try to attract and successfully attract some ruby-throated hummingbirds in the spring and summer here as well. If you go to the signage that's right outside of the Environmental Ed Center, it's actually more than a center, it's a complex, really. And if you look at it, there's a whole bunch of different places that you can visit within this little microcosm of the Y campus here. And if you go for a little walk around, you'll find things like the barnyard with sheep and goats, which is kind of wild that we have a barn here. We even have a raptor center with the closure of Great Valley Nature Center. We're now one of the biggest raptor centers in the area here with birds of prey. So back to my point about wild birds of prey. We have a bunch of in-house birds of prey that live right here at the YMCA. We have red-tailed hawk, red-shouldered hawk. We have a great horned owl that lives there. But we still get some of our residents popping by to peep what's going on here. This is a Cooper's hawk sitting on the hood of my friend's Dodge Durango a couple years ago, just walking back to my car, and I was like, hey, little buddy. Pretty sweet. Red-tailed hawk eating, looks like a catbird. I think that is, yeah, in its talons there. That stinks for a little catbird. And right behind the habitat, right behind the Raptor Center, we have the Wildlife Habitat Garden. In 2003, we received a grant from REI, the YMCA, and there was a vision. The vision was, what if we built a garden that was made of native plants and wasn't browsed by deer, what would it actually look like? So we decided to break ground in 2004 after receiving the grant and starting to build this habitat here. We have this nice tulip poplar as kind of the centerpiece, and we started putting in some native trees and shrubs, started getting some different wildflowers. We even put in a pond that we dug out here and put the liner and built a little waterfall. So here, this is me in 2004, standing at the top of the waterfall that we had just built here. And unfortunately, one thing we learned is that when you put a waterfall in the ground and you don't do it the right way, the liner will rip, and then the whole thing is a mess. So the pond is still there. The creek is gone, but now 10 years later, it's taken a lot different shape here. And unfortunately, a lot of invasives got in. So we kind of had to start anew and pull out a lot of the junk that had gotten in here. But in August 2014, we did another renovation here, putting in more feeders. And looking back in 2004, putting in that water feature here where we had the pond and even a little marshy area for cardinal flower. We have cool amphibians here. This is it looks like a green frog here. Looking at some of our mourning doves hanging out on the little boardwalk we had dropped in there. We get loaded with a lot of other birds here as well. You get, the cardinals of male type. We get a female type here. We even get very strange, weird looking cardinals with molting heads that pass through here sometimes. We even get bluebirds that drop in from other bluebird boxes we have closer to the mansion. We get cool mammals too. I mean, everyone loves a cool squirrel, except when they're eating their bird seed, I guess. Nobody likes a squirrel. Chipmunks with their chubby cheeks. A couple years ago, I was in the habitat garden and I heard this really weird sound, and I looked down the hill from there and put up my camera. A pair of foxes having a little fun down there. Like, hey kids, they're wrestling. Yeah. So with all this wildlife outside, you'd be amazed to know what the inside of this building looks like, which was once a vacant shell of a building. When it first opened as the Nature Center in 1999, this is what it looked like. Quite terrifying, actually, in some ways. You can see very rustic, I might call this here. This is me as a young fella looking at a turtle in this tank, a painted turtle, which is still there to this day. The painted turtle, I went and saw it a couple of weeks ago. Pretty amazing to see just how much this place has changed from 1999 to 2021 when I took these photos here. It's a full-on environmental ed center with a nice fresh coat of paint. We have a giant turtle tank for our Sparky the snapping turtle, who's an enormous snapping turtle. I'm so happy I don't have the job of having to clean that tank. That's for sure. We have this whole animal exhibit here with a lot of great signage here, and also very easy to access windows for children to look inside and see. We even have some pretty interesting history hanging on the wall here. This is an elk head hanging on the wall here. And this elk head was given to us by the Cassatt family's granddaughter. And she told us this story, Mary Ellen Meggs was her name, about how this elk head was presented to Senator Penrose, who was a United States Senator for Pennsylvania. And Cassatt's family was a longtime contributor to the Republican Party at the time. After coming back from a hunting trip, he gave it to Cassatt as a gift. And according to Mrs. Meggs, this elk head hung in the billiards room of the mansion for a long time. Even though they called it the billiards room, there was never a pool table in it. This is what they called it. And then after a while, it hung in the Schuylkill Center for many years. And the Schuylkill Center then gave it back to Mrs. Meggs, and we opened the Nature Center. Mrs. Meggs said, hey, you should have this. This is pretty cool. And after receiving this, Mrs. Meggs said, you should also, after you receive this, call the Roosevelt Presidential Library Museum to get more information on the origin of this animal. So it turns out that Senator Penrose was known for being a poor hunter, and the head of the Republican Party on the hunting trip that Senator Penrose got this on was Teddy Roosevelt. So did Teddy Roosevelt actually shoot this animal head? I don't know, but just the lore and the history behind it from the family, this still hangs in the Nature Center today. So even though the inside has gone through a lot of different fresh coats of paint over the years, to see this cool piece of lore hanging on the wall is still pretty special for us here. So this building, it's meant to take care of these animals, but it's also meant to connect people with nature. And basically, when the YMCA had first started doing environmental education programming in 1998, we didn't really realize that what was going to happen all this time down the road here was really going to blossom into a full-fledged environmental education program. It was just kind of some trial and error trying to start these environmental ed classes. And I was a kid in these classes, so I really enjoyed going to them. In fact, this is us. This was after Hurricane Floyd at John Hines in 1999. This was like 2 weekends after it happened. This is the old big boardwalk wrapped into pieces here. So when I first came to Hines, the big boardwalk was, ripped to shreds and kind of sitting like that. But what ended up coming out of this meeting space where we used to go as kids to learn about nature and spend time with the animals turned into a full-fledged nature club called the YMCA, Earth Service Corps. This is a funny picture. This is my brother here, who was in the first group of Earth Service Corps because I wasn't old enough at the time, wasn't in high school yet. And then right here is Chelsea Lucas, Sue Lucas's daughter, for those that know Sue, which is pretty cool. And since that time, the YMCA Earth Service Corps, which is a national program, it's really started on the West Coast, but here in the East, at the Berwyn campus and the Upper Main Line Y, really blossomed into a full-fledged outdoor education and birding program for students, all from the years spent walking this campus and the years spent enjoying the animals at the nature center. Basically weekly field trips and weekly meetings and monthly field trips on the weekends, sort of like the club we have here, starting in 2001 and still going strong today, doing things like service projects, trying to get students doing hands-on things to fix habitats, to make things, in the woodland here to connect students with nature, like an outdoor classroom. But then we started really getting serious into the birding as well here. So going on birding field trips like the Barnegat Lighthouse. This was a trip in 2010 where I don't know if anyone knows who Nathaniel Sharp is. He's a not local anymore birder, but this is him as a young lad having to get picked up to look through the scope. So young to see him now is in his mid-20s and really doing an amazing job working for the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, connecting students with nature as well. But going on these weekend field trips ended up really spurring us into competing in our very first ever World Series of Birding on May 18th, 2002 in Cape May. So it was the weekend after the World Series. We saw a sign for this thing and we were like, I don't know, man, it sounds pretty cool. Even though we didn't know our birds as well, we felt ambitious, and this was our team that we first got to do the World Series of Birding with. This was my team, the high school team, the Kestrels. And our very first year of doing the World Series of Birding, we had two teams in one van, the Whippoorwills and the Kestrels. And we ended up having a really long journey with the World Series of Birding. And it wasn't just about competitive birding because, the World Series is all about finding as many birds as you can. But from the people perspective of this competition, the goal that we had as the YMCA was, we want to make these kids into good, honest, knowledgeable birders that have great field ID skills, not just people that go out and collect and list. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because I love a good list. I love a list of all kinds. But when it comes to really fostering students who are going to be effective birders down the road and in the field, you got to make sure you're teaching them things about dedication, practice, patience, admitting when you're wrong, knowing how to make proper identifications and understanding nuances, and starting out at the World Series of Birding and really learning our birds and doing our best. We weren't very good at what we were doing. I believe my team in that 2003 year, where we had two teams in one van, we had a high school team and a middle school team. High school team lost by 2 birds to the middle school team, and I'm still a little salty about that. That's okay. It wasn't until DVOC and their team, the Loggerhead Shrikes, became our mentors in the mid-2000s. They started showing us, like, this is how you go to these habitats, and these are the birds you really want if you're going to be a serious World Series of Birding team. And thanks to them, we ended up having 15 years of competition. We had 35 teams that went to compete in the World Series, a couple of different championships over the years. The middle school teams did a great job with that. We had 1 year in the high school team where we had a World Series of Birding championship that they had won for the high school division. In 2013, we had our first ever youth win of the World Series of Birding, where our youth team actually won the whole thing, which, at the time was met with some mixed reactions because, the folks who've been doing this a long time were, I don't think they were very thrilled that a youth team was winning. But I think what was important to note was it wasn't like our youth team had some wild and wacky score. It was we had 186 species, which I actually saw 189. The students saw 186. They missed a couple when we were out there. But it's funny to think that even with them missing birds, they still put up an amazing number. And the second place team had 182. So it wasn't like there was some like giant discrepancy between. I feel like when you look at a World Series of birding and you look at a fair day of birding, if all the teams have a relatively like, you know, these lists that are in a similar number, I feel like it really shows that, you know, it's all about what happens when you take the time and you dedicate yourself to birding and you practice and you get in the field. And it's not like any of these students here did this over a 1 year time. Many of these students competed in the World Series of birding 5, 6, 7 years, some of whom scheduling this around their AP testing as they're in high school trying to get into college because of their amazing and serious level of study and dedication. So after all these amazing years here, it's just incredible to see the people aspect here of what happens when you go for a walk in the woods at the Cassatt Preserve and you meet other birders when you're there and you step into the nature center and you discover that although this place is an amazing oasis for birds and a great habitat, there's a whole lot more than what meets the eye when it comes to the birds that are coming to visit this place. There's a lot of people that come to visit this place, and when people get connected with nature, you never know what's going to happen. And it's amazing now that the Earth Service Corps program that I used to run is now being run by a former student of mine, Danny Smith, who takes the students on birding field trips now as well. This is them at Hines. I think this is from Cape May Point State Park. I recognize the brown signage here. And that's also, it looks like it's the Meadows on an amazing swallow flight here. But it's amazing to see what happens when you connect people with nature and how the story goes. So it's not about how it looks, right? When you look at an old shell of a building in 1999 like this, it doesn't look like a whole lot, but what this building did for a lot of people and what this campus did for a lot of people really couldn't be measured. And for me, it's been incredible for me because thanks to what I learned as a kid birding at the Y and what I learned eventually becoming an employee and taking students birding at the Y, it's launched me into my career as a teacher and also running my birding program that I have at my school now, Trailblazers. So my purpose of all this, when I call it the Headwaters, it really starts a lot more than just birds, and it starts a lot more than just a creek. It started a lot for so many people who just love nature, whether they've stuck with it and are leading bird walks now, or people that just like to have the casual hobby of birding. What this preserve has done for people, it's been the genesis of a lot of things for a lot of people. And it's a place that's so special. And I'm really happy to get to share the story of its habitats and the history and the people tonight here. So with that, I don't know how many minutes that was. I forgot to start my timer, but I've made it all the way to the end here. So I guess, are there any questions?